Chapter 19. Wilks was not afraid to die. He ran toward what he considered the safest place on this tiny planet. But if he didn't make it, well, too bad. He'd been living on borrowed time since his first meeting with the aliens so long ago. What had it been? 12, 14 standard years? Billie had been 10. He'd have to ask her how old she was now. He should have died with his squad then, but he hadn't. And he'd spent a great deal of drink and chem trying to forget it. Fate hadn't wanted that. The powers that be in the universe, not to mention the colonial marines, had thrown it all back into his face. Somewhere along the way, he had come up with a new purpose: to wipe the aliens out. Down to the last drone, the last egg. Getting himself killed here would prevent him from accomplishing his mission. And that bothered him more than dying. Once in his life there had been personal fear, but those days were long gone. A few years back, during one of his 2-week chem binges, Wilks had been picked up in an alley by civilians. He was naked, and his ID implants had been fuzzed by the people who'd robbed and then tried to kill him, to keep the authorities from trying to identify the body. Not knowing he was military, the civilians had stuck him into a medicenter and given him the standard life support treatment, which included sessions with psychiatric types. It had been a teaching hospital, and there were plenty of young medics eager to work with such an obviously depressed patient. Surely that unrevised scar on his face bespoke worlds of mental impairment. It didn't take long for them to peg him as a career Marine and diagnose his problem. But while waiting for the medical MPs to come and fetch him, they hustled to get as many budding headbenders as they could exposed to him. Chances like this didn't come along very often. In one of these sessions, with an attractive young woman he would have tried to bed under other circumstances, he first heard about the Doc Holliday syndrome. Holliday, it seemed, had been some kind of medical man in the Terran frontier times, a dentist or some such. He developed a fatal and, at the time, incurable illness. So, the young doctor said, he packed up, moved to a drier climate, which was supposed to offer some symptomatic comfort for his remaining days, and became a professional gambler and outlaw. He engaged in a number of gunfights, and although he wasn't a particularly adept shooter, always managed to prevail over his opponents. There is an instance, for example, where M. Holliday fired upon a man inside a public drinking establishment, using a period weapon called a 6-shooter. He was within 7 meters of his opponent, emptied his weapon, and missed entirely. Given that the 6-shooter was supposedly accurate to a range of 50 meters in the hand of an expert, this was considered poor marksmanship. He later switched to a weapon called a shotgun, which, I am informed, is dangerous over a somewhat wider area. How interesting, Wilks told the young shrink. Maybe he would try to fuck her, if for no other reason than to shut her up. Before he could speak, however, she continued, obviously in love with the sound of her own voice. From what our medico-historical researchers can determine, the primary reason Holliday won his duels was because he did not care if he did. That brought a frown to Wilks's face. What does that mean? He was immediately sorry he had asked. M. Holliday was going to die soon, or so he thought. Actually, he lived well beyond his predicted termination, the diagnosis having been somewhat erroneous. But because he thought his days were numbered, and that this number was very small, he believed he had nothing to lose. Whenever he faced somebody in a duel, they called them shoot-downs, or showdowns, or some such testosteronic, euphemistic nonsense. He had no fear of dying. He was, in his own mind, already dead. Further, he regularly imbibed large amounts of alcoholic beverages, and was thus further anesthetized. While this doubtless impaired his physical responses vis-a-vis his reaction time and weapons prowess, these things in fact gave him a physiological edge. Most of the people he faced in such duels did not wish to die, and thus their fear often caused them to hesitate or behave in a panicky manner. Against an opponent who sincerely did not care if he lived or died, but whose only goal was to shoot them and be damned, such fears can be fatal. And apparently, these encounters were fatal more often than not against M. Holliday DDS. Wilks shook his head. He wondered if she talked like that when she came.
Wonderful. You want to take off your clothes and screw a war hero before they come to get me?
The young woman smiled, unfazed by his crude invitation. I think not, Corporal Wilks. It would hardly be professional. Running down a corridor with alien monsters searching for him, Wilks grinned, the scar on his face doubtless making the expression hideous to see. I know just how you felt, Doc. When you live on borrowed time and don't give a dog's dick if you die, it makes things nice and simple. Billie saw a man holding a carbine squatting behind a bulkhead extrusion, trying to hide. When he saw her spot him, he started to point his weapon at them. "Wilks!" she yelled. She brought her own carbine around to cover the trooper. "Don't do it, Marine!" Powell called out. But the trooper was rising, still swinging his piece toward them. "The general is back! You're all dead meat!" Billie and Wilks fired at about the same time. The trooper did a twisting jig as he fell, his chest blown open, his blood splattering the wall. Billie felt sick. Killing people never got any easier, but she kept moving. Self-preservation ruled. Somebody had killed the lights and life support in the corridor, but Spears was prepared for that. His troops were suited, in full combat gear. "Go to Spook Eyes, Marines," he ordered. He clicked his own faceplate filters into amp-light mode, saw the corridor light up a ghostly green. Another control flicked on his lamps, and the glow that would look a dim and almost invisible violet to unaided eyes splashed the walls with brilliant green, almost as bright as the normal overheads. "Stay sharp, troops! Overlapping fields of fire!" Somebody stumbled into view 20 meters ahead. Spears saw the man waving his arms, heard him call out, "General! Is that you? Don't shoot! I'm on your side!" He couldn't see much. Spears could tell that. He wore station coveralls. Didn't have a weapon or vision augmenters. "Fire!" Spears commanded. The two Marines running point opened up. The sounds were muted but audible. The man ahead fell as if his legs had disappeared. Many inside the station would be his allies, but Spears couldn't take time now to worry about loyalties. One enemy with a grenade could cause a lot of damage. Better to clear the halls first and sort things out later. Abruptly, the gravity shut off. There was no warning, merely a sudden cessation. The running Marines bounded high into the air, slammed into the walls or ceiling, or tumbled along the floor, out of control. Switching from nearly a full G to a tenth or less between steps was not something a man could realistically train for. "Switch on your boots!" Spears yelled. There were magnetic strips under the floors, put there for just such a failure, and the combat boots would allow walking, albeit a much slower pace than in normal gravity. When the confusion settled down, along with the troopers, only one man had been injured too badly to continue. The platoon medic said he'd broken his neck and would need full rehab. "Can he move?" "No, sir. He's paralyzed." "Leave him then. Somebody will come for him later." Something, actually, Spears figured. The man was useless as a soldier now, save as fodder for the new troops. Might as well let them have him. "Sir!" the wounded man cried out. "Please! Don't leave me here for those things!" "They also serve who lie and wait," Spears said. "It's war, son. You fucked up, you pay for it. Let's move, troops." They shuffled along, boots clumping on the deck. The cries of the injured man stopped when Spears had his unit switch radio freaks to OpChan 3. Powell listened to the comm he carried, shook his head. He and Billie and Wilks were in the approach corridor leading to the starship hangars. They still had lights and power, though much of the station had apparently been shut down. Panicky reports came over the comm, voices blending into a continuous and frightened walla.
Life support is shut down in D2! It got Mari! It just took him! Air doors are down! Air doors are down!
Are under fire! Somebody is shooting here!
Monsters! Monsters! Ah! Get away!
The sound of explosions, gunfire, metal on metal, and other sounds of death and confusion came too. For a moment, Wilks felt himself grow heavier, as if somebody had suddenly put a weight on his back. Then the feeling vanished.
Wilks? Somebody is fiddling with the gravity, he said. Bueller, trying to slow Spears down, or throw the aliens off stride probably.
Powell was on the edge of a full-blown panic himself. Wilks could see that. His face was pale, sweaty, and he clutched at the comm as if it were some kind of lifeline.
The base is overrun, he said. We're fucked. I should have known better than to try Spears. He's a killer. He's a madman. We're all doomed. Listen, Wilks said, as if talking to a buzzhead recruit or a small child. Listen. We can get away. We'll take one of the starships.
Powell shook his head.
Can't. It takes too long to program a launch. They'll get us. They'll get us. We'll run an old program, Wilks said. Take one of the ships back to where it came from. Not a good idea. They came from Earth. All of them. We'll fix the goddamned program along the way. Move, Powell.
Powell stared at him, nodded.
Okay. You're in charge now, okay?
Poor sucker. He should have gone into another line of work. Powell should be drinking high tea at some university, talking with other professors about modern art or ancient history. Only thing was, without killers like Spears and, yeah, like me, there weren't ever gonna be such places again. Maybe not, anyhow. Ahead of them, a pair of aliens stepped out of the shadows and hissed. Wilks felt himself grinning. Fuck you, he thought. Don't you know me? You're messing with Doc Holliday, you stupid bastards. He slid over next to Billie, who saw the aliens. They stood shoulder to shoulder and raised their carbines. It got noisy in the corridor.
Let's go, Powell. Stay with us.
The trio moved toward the hangar entrance.